time left, and I'm keeping an eye on time. But gear shift to smart drugs, nootropics. I'm not sure how to pronounce that either. Are there any particular types of cognitive enhancers that you find interesting? And one, which maybe you can recall the name of, came up in one of your episodes, in fact, because it was described in a pamphlet by one of the chemists. I think it was the same chemist who had
yes, 2CD.
2CD.
Yeah.
All right. So are there any particular cognitive enhancers that you have found effective and or interesting?
It's such a philosophically interesting question, because whenever people say that something made them smarter, I always think of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Are you familiar with it?
Don't know what that is.
It's these two psychologists at Cornell, I believe, found this effect that the more competent someone is in a given task, whether it's musical ability or humor, the more likely they are to underrate their ability, and the less competent they are, the more likely they are to overrate their ability. So I always wonder, what would be the manifestation of a true cognitive enhancer? Would it make you feel stupid? Would it make you feel increasingly aware of all the things you don't know? Would you feel intellectually ashamed of yourself? And could it be that the true smart drugs have all been abandoned because they actually made people feel abysmally stupid? There's a major problem with self-assessment in the realm of nootropics. Just because something makes you feel smarter does not mean that you are smarter. And then there's a larger question of, how do we define intelligence? What does it mean to be smart? Is having an improved memory, does that mean that you're smarter? Is being more creative a sign of intelligence? It's typically not included in any kind of objective measure of intelligence. So how do you define it to begin with? And what are these drugs doing? And what is the intended effect? It's a really complicated question. The most basic thing, I think, is memory. That's the thing that most people can agree, if they had a better memory, it would be useful. And I do believe that some of these things, often some of the most mundane things like nicotine, improve memory and aid focus a little bit. So of all the things that I've tried in the realm of nootropics, and it's many, the one that I still use is just nicotine gum. I try to use it less. I sometimes don't use it at all. I know that I told that story about not using it, but I still chew it on occasion because it really helps me read, especially if I'm going, plowing through a dense novel or something. I like to go to the library and pop in a square of nicotine gum and just really try to focus. But, Noopept was okay. PRL 853 was okay. Phenylparacetam is okay. They're all, typically it's the stimulating ones that are a little bit better. But then the question is, are these nootropics or are they simply stimulants? And are stimulants nootropics? How do we designate these things?
Have you tried 2CD? I have not.
Yes, absolutely. And 2CD is really interesting because one thing, if you read about people, mnemonists, people with photographic memories, one thing they all seem to have in common is they're all synesthetes.
Right. And
one thing I've wondered about that synesthesia that they have is this multisensory cross-linking of information aiding recall? Because
and just for people listening, just to define that term, so it's if people who may smell colors or visualize numbers, that's the type of cross-linking that you see in these, like The Mind of a Mnemonist by A.J. Luria gets into this in great depth. But sorry to interrupt, please continue.
Right. So if when you think of an orange, it's not just an orange, it's the color, it's the smell, it's the taste, it's the sound, it's the texture, and there's all this multisensory encoding of the information. Does that allow you to recall the orange in a different way, or do you have more handles on that memory that allow you to retrieve it more easily? So psychedelics also induce synesthesia. And that was one question that I had, is could this synesthesia-inducing effect be harnessed in order to aid retention of information? And I don't have a real answer to that question, but I think that if drugs like 2CB do have any sort of nootropic effect, it may be as a result of that kind of, I mean, there's different ways that maybe encouraging synesthesia would be one way. Another way might be just a basic stimulant effect. Another way might be that they cause you to approach problems from a different perspective. And this is why James Fadiman is very interested in psychedelics in problem solving, is because sometimes having a different way is all that it takes. Not necessarily a better way, not necessarily a smarter way, simply a different way of looking at something is all it takes to solve that problem, because you got locked into a certain way of approaching it. You're only thinking about it one way, and just to mix it up, to shuffle the deck for a moment and think, well, maybe I could have done this in a completely different way, is what it takes.
Jim's great. He's really fun to chat with too. About the studies that they had conducted related to the problem solving with hard sciences and a lot of engineering problems. For people interested, I also spoke with Jim on the podcast, so you can find the Fadiman episode pretty easily. But for you personally, then, if you had nicotine gum currently in pole position, would you put anything in second and third place?
I think, the classics, nicotine, caffeine.
Just like caffeine anhydrous, or I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, you are, yeah.
Sweet.
And, good old-fashioned Ritalin on occasion. I say this with a little bit of reluctance because stimulants are addictive, and it's kind of a bad habit to get into, but I would be dishonest if I didn't acknowledge the fact that using low-dose Ritalin has helped me.
What does low dose mean?
10 milligrams. I don't take it every day, but it's a tricky one because it does give you a certain intellectual stamina that helps you read and write and think. And I think that with a lot of discipline, you could achieve those same effects without Ritalin, but it's helped me.
You mentioned something that I want to come back to just for a moment for people who might be listening and interested, if they want to assess before and after effects on cognition. You can find online tests that are used in studies to assess reaction time, working memory, things of that type. So if one were proactively looking at the before and after effects of just about anything, I mean, yerba mate or alcohol, doesn't really matter. There are tests if you look up some of the studies done by any number of cognitive neuroscience, Kahneman, and others, where you can you can identify online tests that can give you help you to establish a baseline if you want to look at some of the effects.
Yeah.
But yeah, the intelligence can be fine sliced into so many different component areas.
Right.
I mean, it can get really, really complex for people who would be. I was actually involved with a study. People should check this out. He's also been on the podcast. Adam Ghazali out of UCSF at the Ghazali Lab. They developed a software called NeuroRacer that was very, very effective. They ended up, I think it was the cover of Nature at one point, being able to reverse certain aspects of age-related cognitive decline. And then after the cessation of training with software, there was a persistence of effect, I want to say, at least 6 months later. It was really remarkable. So there are tests you can use to assess the effects of these types of compounds. Well, Hamilton, we could go on, or I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I suppose we should probably wrap up in just a little bit. Where can people find you, say hello, and otherwise learn about your work?
Yeah, I mean, I have a Twitter at Hamilton Morris and Instagram at Hamilton Morris. I'm starting a website, hamiltonmorris.com, but it's not up yet.
My prediction is that we will have it up, the royal we, in this case, meaning Hamilton and people I might introduce you to, by the time that this goes live. So HamiltonMorris.com.
HamiltonMorris.com. And if you want to watch my TV show, Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, it can be purchased for $3 an episode on iTunes and Amazon. And it's also free on Hulu, and it's on National Geographic and Viceland, and I'm sure you can also torrent it as well.
And if you have Amazon Prime, I think it's actually available with Prime membership.
Oh, good.